All right, today we're diving into a really fascinating study out of Sweden that looks at a huge experiment in public education. It's all about school choice. And believe me, it uncovers a genuine economic mystery. What if the schools that everyone is flocking to were actually worse for your future? And really, this is the question at the heart of it all. When you give students and parents total freedom to pick any school they want, do they naturally choose the ones that will set them up for the most success down the road? You'd think the answer would be a simple yes, of course. But, well, the data from Sweden tells a way more complicated and frankly a much more interesting story. So let's set the stage. Starting back in the 90s, Sweden threw open the doors of its high school system to private companies. And as you can see from this chart, wow, the for-profit charter schools just exploded. I mean, they went from nothing to enrolling almost half of all high schoolers in cities, while public school numbers just flatlined. From a market perspective, this looks like a massive, undeniable success. But are they winning the popularity contest for the right reasons? Okay, but here's where the story takes a wild turn, and it's a big one. The study followed these students for years, deep into their adult lives, and found that, on average, going to one of these super popular charter schools actually lowers a student's long-term earnings by about 2%. Now, that might not sound like a huge number, but over an entire career, that's a big deal. It's like losing the financial benefit of half a year of school. So yeah, suddenly we have a real mystery on our hands. So this is our central puzzle, right? Why on earth would thousands and thousands of students choose something that seems to be actively against their own best interest financially? Are they all just making a huge mistake, or is there something else going on here that we're not seeing? Let's dig in. To even begin to crack this case, we have to understand a crucial detail. Not all these charter schools in Sweden are created equal. We've got to break down the difference between the for-profit schools and the non-profit ones. You know, what makes the Swedish system so perfect for a study like this is that it's a true natural experiment. Every school, whether it's public, for-profit, or nonprofit, has to play by the exact same rules. They all get the same amount of public money per student, they're not allowed to charge tuition, and they all have to teach the same national curriculum. It creates this perfectly level playing field where the only real differences are who owns the school and what their ultimate motivation is. And boom, here is our first major clue. It turns out that both types of charter schools, the for-profits and the nonprofits, have a negative effect on what students earn later in life. But, and this is key, they do it for completely different reasons. The research shows that the for-profit schools hurt earnings because they just deliver a lower quality of education. Think things like less experienced teachers. The nonprofits, on the other hand, hurt earnings because they tend to focus on things like the arts or humanities, which just happen to lead to careers that don't pay as much. It's like two different culprits leaving two totally different sets of fingerprints. So let's follow that first set of fingerprints. We're going to zero in on the for-profit schools. If they're really providing a lower quality education, we need to figure out how and, more importantly, why. It's time to follow the money. So when the researchers say for-profits have lower quality, what does it actually look like on the ground in a real school? Well, the data on what these schools are spending their money on makes it pretty darn clear. Just look at these numbers. They're pretty stark. In public schools, almost 80% of teachers have a proper teaching degree. In the for-profits, it's less than half. The teachers in for-profits are also, on average, a whole 8 years younger. And here's the real kicker. For-profit schools cram almost 5 more students into every classroom. That's a 35% larger class size. These aren't just tiny tweaks. These are fundamental differences in what it's like to be a student in these schools. And the author of the paper really just lays it all out for us. Since these schools can't charge you more tuition to make money, the only lever they can pull to generate a profit is to cut their costs. And what's the biggest expense for any school? It's the teachers. So by hiring younger, less credentialed teachers and asking them to manage bigger classes, these for-profit schools can squeeze out a profit. But that cost-cutting has a direct, negative impact on the quality of the education you receive. Okay, so we figured out how the for-profit schools end up with lower quality, but honestly, that just makes our original mystery even weirder, right? If the quality is noticeably lower, why in the world are they so popular? To answer that, we have to stop looking at the schools and start looking at the students. What do they actually care about when they're picking a high school? And here it is. This is the big reveal. The study built this incredible model of thousands of real school applications, and it found that students are making perfectly rational choices.
The thing is, they're optimizing for things that matter to them right now, how close the school is, and whether it has the specific programs they're interested in. And what's completely off their radar? How that choice might affect their paycheck 10 years from now. If you want one single number that just brilliantly sums this all up, this is it. The model figured out how much farther a student would be willing to travel to go to a school that offered slightly higher future earnings. The answer? For a lower achieving student, it was just 200 meters. That's it. That's like 2 city blocks. And you have to remember, the average student in Stockholm is already traveling 9 times kilometers to get to school. So in the grand scheme of things, a potential little salary bump a decade away is barely even a rounding error in their decision.
So there you have it. Mystery solved. The market isn't broken at all. It's actually working perfectly. For-profit schools have taken over because they are exceptionally good at giving students what they want in the here and now. Schools that are easy to get to and have the cool programs they're looking for. The system is perfectly tuned to satisfy the immediate desires of a 15-year-old, but it's coming at the cost of their long-term financial well-being. So this leads us to the final and maybe the toughest question of all. What do we do about it? If these schools are so popular, but we know they lead to worse outcomes, what would actually happen if policymakers just said, okay, no more for-profit schools? Well, the study ran a simulation to find out.
And the results are, well, they're messy. On average, sure, student earnings would go up a bit as they got reassigned to public schools. But that average hides a really important split. The high-achieving kids, they tend to get into better public schools, and their future earnings actually go up. But a lot of the lower-achieving students, who were enrolled in really valuable hands-on vocational programs at the for-profits, they get pushed into less useful programs. For them, getting rid of the for-profit schools would actually hurt their financial future. You end up with clear winners and clear losers.
And that leaves us with this really tricky central trade-off. The system we have right now is great at giving students what they want today, but it costs them down the line. And if you try to fix it by just banning the for-profit schools, you help one group of students, but you actively harm another vulnerable group who lose out on important job training. There is absolutely no simple, clean answer here. Ultimately, this whole Swedish school puzzle forces us to wrestle with a much bigger question, one that goes way beyond education. In any system where people are given free choice, a market will pop up to give them exactly what they want. But what this study is such a powerful reminder of is that what we want in the short term isn't always what we need in the long term. And that's a tension that every single society has to figure out how to manage.